Welcome to the 15th episode of ProShip Parcelcast, how address quality shines a light on dirty data. I'm host today, John Wells, head of partnerships here at ProShip, and I'm joined by Chris Lean. Chris, would you mind introducing yourself?
Well, thanks, John. I'm really glad to be here as well. So thank you for the opportunity. My name is Chris Lean. I'm the Executive Vice President of Postal Affairs for BCC Software, a Blue Crest company. Been involved in mailing industry for over 30 years, primarily focused on address quality through a lot of that time, specifically focusing on name and address, and as well as change of address, keeping up with those customers that are moving all the time. So excited to be here. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Chris. What are we here for today? So the topic today is, again, how address quality shines the light on dirty data. If you're listening to this, if you're one of our listeners out there, you're probably in the middle of peak or peak just happened to you. As a shipper, there's a greater than zero chance that some of the packages that were supposed to go places didn't get to the right place. And as a customer or a consumer, there's a possibility that you may not have received your package. And it could be a variety of reasons, but what we're here to talk about today is address validation. So a solution like ProShip, one of our customers goes to ship a package from a warehouse or a store, they need to use a third party, which is why we partnered with BCC to confirm that that address is valid. But beyond that, that's kind of my limited understanding. So, Chris, thanks for joining. Can you kind of give us the background of, when we're talking about address validation, what is that? Who should be using it?
Thanks, John. Address quality is really something that, when you think about it, sort of ubiquitous to every single vertical market, and it's mission critical when we talk about delivering packages, parcels, mail pieces, et cetera. So address quality, it has its foundation with the United States Postal Service. That's really where a lot of that came out. With the Postal Service trying to keep on up with, now it's 161 million delivery points here in the United States, and in fact we add another 1.1 million new delivery points every year to the United States. Yeah, John, that's like adding a new Dallas, Texas. It's crazy on how large it is. But when you look at a name and address from a human readable aspect, you don't know if it's good or bad. This is where we talk about shining the light on dirty data. You might look at that name and address and think that that's perfectly correct. I see a city on it. I see a state. I see some numbers after it. That could be a zip code. I guess it's 5 digits. Who knows? And I may have this thing called a street in front of it with a combination of letters and numbers. But is that really a valid address? Is that location a home or a business? Is it an empty parking lot? Does that person still live there anymore? Is it a seasonal address? There are so many different things to consider when you talk about name and address. And even if you're getting that name and address sourced directly from your customer, if somebody's purchasing something from an e-commerce site, they may think they kind of know what their address is, but at the end of the day, it's the carrier. It's the carrier you're working with, John, that's going to make that final determination of whether it's deliverable as addressed or not. And so by making some upfront investments and using some best practices, you can put a more proactive approach so that you're not faced with bad customer experience or misships, misdirects, or just a piece that gets lost. That's why I'm excited to talk on the podcast today about this.
Thank you very much for kind of setting the background there. So,
Yeah.
a question I have for you: what are the 3 C's when we think of address validity or address validation?
Yeah, thanks, John. It was kind of something that I started talking about, gosh, maybe 20 years ago, as we were starting to work on national change of address in a larger aspect, as part of the Postmaster General's Mailers Technical Advisory Committee, where I still serve at the pleasure of the Postmaster General. The 3C approach is getting an address that's complete, correct, and current, right? So the way I always look at it is, for timely, predictable, and ultimate delivery of a package, parcel, or mail piece, you need to have an address that's complete, correct, and current. Hey, John, for example, when's the last time you called the wrong phone number but got the right person, right? That's not going to happen. And so you need to make sure that you've got an address that's complete, correct, and current. And by doing that, you're going to ensure that you got that timely, predictable, and ultimate delivery of the mail. But breaking it down, so an address is complete when you've got all the required elements there. And it can even be something as simple as whether it's a north or south, or what we call a directional, a post-directional on an address. Is it northeast for the avenue? Is it southwest for the street? Things like that. Is it a street? Is it an avenue? Is it a circle? Those kind of things. So getting the address complete, make sure I have it. And then you have to get it correct. And that means, is the zip code matching the state and the city combination? That's very important because, the technology has to be able to rationalize where that's going. And then you can get into making it current with change of address. But I think for a lot of the listeners here, hey, if we can get an address that's complete and we can get it correct, we should be in a much better position to ensure we're getting an on-time delivery of that package.
Complete, correct, and
That's
current. Got to
correct.
remember the
Three
three
C
C's.
approach. That's right.
So as a follow-up to that, correct sounds like it's a very important part of it. Obviously, it's the sandwich in the middle.
Yep.
What happens? What are the costs? If there is a bad address, what does it mean to the shipper? What does it mean to the customers, or just generally?
It's a great question. So I look at this from two different aspects. First of all, there's the hard costs or the direct tangible parts of that, right? Most carriers are going to charge you if the address is wrong and the carrier ended up delivering it to the wrong location or just couldn't even find the place, right? It could also be something that you put down a business address. You thought it was a business address, but it turned out to be the person's home, right? There are different surcharges that can come into play with that. Even the Postal Service is raising their prices for misshipped parcels because they recognize that there's a tangible cost with that. So there's a tangible cost back to the carrier, whether it's an accessorial charge or, again, in the case of the Postal Service, they're just going to debit it right out of your permanent account. And then you have the intangible, and that's really arguably the larger cost to you. It's one thing to be hit with a 75 cent, $1.50, $6 for a bad address after the fact. But how much did it cost you to get that customer in the first place? How much did it cost you to attract their attention, get them to go to your webpage or whatever portal it is that they selected your product, and then to make the purchase, right? Yeah, if you have a bad experience for that customer with a late or a misshipped product, that's not going to turn out well. And I've seen it, firsthand, where I've had to get in the car and go a couple of blocks down the road because my package got left at the wrong location because they didn't quite understand that it was a half street or whatever it was for a former address. So getting it right up front is a key part to help avoiding those costs. And you'd be surprised. It's pretty affordable and easy to get access to some of these advanced address quality tools today.
Yeah, what's interesting is we had our user group meeting a couple months ago,
Hmm.
and Matt Graham from your team was attending as well. But we were talking to some of our mutual customers, some of our customers, and it sounds like the address validation fees that some of them are paying now, if they were to fix it with a solution like this, the ROI pays off pretty quickly. And I imagine that's true of any shipper that's shipping, a certain volume. Basically, you're talking about, the tens of thousand packages plus a month.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say absolutely. And some of the models I've looked at, John, it can be a 20-to-1 ROI for the investment on that, right? Because if you take into consideration the lifetime value of the customer, the repeat purchase on that, it's significant. Even when we talk about outbound direct marketing, right? So direct marketing, direct mail continues to improve in terms of response rates, but we're still talking, anywhere between a 5 to 10% response rate. But if you're not doing good address quality, if you're not practicing this 3C approach, your response rate could be sitting at 2 or 3%. And you think, well, maybe I just didn't have a really good campaign. No, not necessarily. You might have had a great campaign, a very compelling message. It just wasn't getting the right customer. So making that investment up front not only ensures that those pieces are going to get delivered on time in the manner that you expect, but also that the customer is going to have an opportunity to respond to that. And that response is going to generate additional revenue.
Yeah, I think if you were any sales or marketing person and you heard that you could double your throughput, that would somewhat pique their interest.
It would. And remember, the downstream impact of address quality can be profound because there's an old adage, right? Garbage in, garbage out. If you're making business decisions on flawed data, on bad addresses, then the downstream things that are going to happen are going to be completely wrong. You're going to miss out on that opportunity. So starting with a good foundation in address quality is going to really help to avoid any downstream costs that you may have with that.
So why, if I'm a shipper, can't I just rely on whatever carriers I'm using in their address validation tools, endemic to the solution itself, or whatever they offer?
It's a great question. To be clear, the carriers, all the major carriers have address quality technology, right? That's an important part of how they're processing and grouping and delivering the packages, parcels, mail, whatever it is. But remember, it's relying entirely on that name and address that's on the label, that's on the surface of the package, the parcel, maybe a mail piece. And so it has the optical character reading technology, or OCR technology, has to read that information. And that's going to be a series of letters and numbers, right, that it's going to try and extract. But how that's rendered, if you will, on that label, whether it's right or wrong or even readable, that goes a long way to it. Is that letter an A? Is it an O? Is that an I or an L? It has a lot to do with it. So relying on the carrier can be problematic. It also means that you're expecting that the carrier has time, right? And knowledge of their route to be able to go and make that change. I mentioned before, my personal experience, a place where I used to live, I was on 75th Avenue. I had a neighbor on 75th and a half. We both had the same house number. I got to meet him, usually once a week, but for the wrong reason, right? So I appreciate, hey, that was a great way for me to talk to my neighbor. It's a bad way to rely on address quality. The fact of the matter is that carriers, particularly, with Postal Service, UPS, FedEx, they just don't have time to drive around the neighborhood to figure out where that piece is going to go. So it's almost like you got one chance. You've got one chance to get it right. So you need to make sure that you put the investment up front on the address quality, that the label is printed clearly and can be read clearly. And by the way, and we chatted about this earlier, it's interesting. The human brain looks at an address and reads it from top to bottom, left to right. That's just how we're conditioned to read. It's a complete opposite for the equipment to read that name and address. It reads it from the bottom right to the upper left, starting first with the zip code, then the state, then the city, then the address line, and then the individual. So even something like that zip code, boy, if you don't get those 5 digits right, that can be a big problem for delivery.
Yeah, so if it's reading it, it's basically if that first entry point, which to us is the last thing, oh, we figured out everything beforehand, it's just going to error it out automatically, like, from the start.
Right off the bat, yep. And I'll tell you, that's one of the number one problems I've seen for a long time is that what we call the last line, the city state zip. If that's not correct, then it's not even going to make it to the address line. It's already decided that that's going to be a problem. And one other thing too that's important, and I mentioned before, that's a lot of times you'll receive the address directly from somebody that maybe purchases something. Well, they may have forgotten to include what we call a secondary address line. That's the apartment number or the unit number or something like that. So having an address quality solution up front as part of that point of entry or that order process gives an opportunity for the shipper to communicate with the purchaser or the e-commerce purchaser and say, hey, it looks like you're in a high-rise building, but I want to make sure that package gets delivered to your door in that high-rise or to your parcel locker in that high-rise. And so it could prompt the user to say, look, are you willing to provide me with the unit number so I don't have to leave it on a table in the lobby?
Yeah, where I live, bought a house a few years ago, about 5 years ago, and it was all new build. And even though they're individual addresses, they're row homes, so they're off by two each. So as you can imagine, new address, carriers had to figure it out over the last few years. There have been a lot of packages delivered to other people's doorsteps or
Yeah.
other people's packages delivered to us. So I've done a lot of walking on behalf of FedEx, UPS, and Amazon to deliver packages to some of my neighbors. So I've gotten to meet them kind of in a similar fashion.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, John. Like I said, it's a great way to meet your neighbors, right? But it's a bad example of address quality.
Right, right. Here's a question. I mean,
Mhm.
you've been doing this for 30 years, you said. Am I correct?
Yeah, 30 years in the mailing industry. Yeah,
30 years in the mailing. Is an address just an address, or can I learn more from just what's on the paper on the screen?
it's a great question. I like to think of the address as sort of the anchor of the relationship with the customer. And what I mean by that is people put thought into where they decide to work, where they decide to call home, where they rent, right? That point on the physical map, that piece of terra firma, if you will, that they've decided that they're going to hang their coat, or in the case of northern Minnesota, my parka, right? But where they decide that's going to be home, that means something. So if you've got an address that's complete, correct, and current for that customer, if you know definitively, yes, this is where Chris Lean lives, now I can use that as a point of reference to other ancillary data. I can look at geocoding data, for example, to be able to see, well, how far away is it for Chris to go to the new coffee shop that opened up somewhere? Can he drive to it or walk to it or bike to it? Again, in my case, northern Minnesota, maybe I'll snowmobile to it. But you have, that geocoding to be able to do that. Can you look at demographic data? Right, looking at where that address, I can now correlate to a certain demographic or an income level, and that might help me to decide how I want to market to somebody. And John, just think about the difference between the address, a physical address, and a cell phone or an email account. I could have a cell phone number with an area code anywhere in the country, or an email address, and you'd have no idea really where I'm at. But picking a phone number, for example, you might look at my phone number and say, for example, I had a Florida area code just because maybe that's where the company's based and they gave me a company phone, and think that I would be interested in a swimsuit in February. I'm not. I live in Minnesota. I need a parka and a really good hat. So, understanding what that customer's address is going to help you to better market to the customer, understand their the neighborhood they're in, why they chose that location, and build upon that for a strengthened customer relationship that will ultimately end in a much higher value, lifetime value from that customer.
So I take it you're not doing the polar bear challenge this winter.
No, no.
All right, fair enough. So what we talked about kind of is one-to-one, how our platforms are integrated is
Yeah.
oftentimes when a package is getting delivered, when a package is getting shipped, fulfilled, or rated. What about for marketing teams or companies? How can address validation assist marketing campaigns?
Excellent question. So again, let's assume I've made that investment in address quality up front. I've fulfilled the customer that package, that parcel. I understand where they are. Well, now here's where the change comes in. That person moved. Okay, every hour in the United States, over 6,500 people move. That's 12% of the population, John. It's profound. We're a country of nomadic people, always moving around all the time. And so to keep up with these customers on the move, you need to leverage different types of data sets. One of the most popular is the National Change of Address Database from the United States Postal Service, something that BCC Software is a direct licensee. And I can tell you, I see thousands, over 6,000 lists a day that are running through that service. So it's something that is constantly moving around. And if you're going to do direct marketing to a customer, let's say you've got a good customer, you want to continue to build on that relationship. So you send out maybe a catalog or a postcard or something like that to build upon that relationship. If you don't have that address current, if you've not made a complete, correct, and current, and it's advertising mail, the Postal Service will throw that piece of mail away before it even arrives or even attempted to arrive with that. In fact, John, did you know over 4 billion pieces of mail are thrown away by the Postal Service every year that never ended up at the final destination? And it's all because of exactly what we just talked about, bad address quality. We call that UAA mail, undeliverable as address mail. So putting an investment in address quality up front not only ensures that you're going to get those packages and parcels delivered to the customer appropriately as they would expect, but it also creates that anchor point, as I mentioned before, to build upon, to leverage the full 3C approach, complete, correct, and current, and now begin to strengthen the relationship with that customer and avoid the UAA or undeliverable as address problem.
So just to make sure I understand correctly, you're telling me if I were to move, let's say Southwest was sending me the mailers, they were sending me my drink coupons next year, right, when they took them back up, and they didn't have the correct address, it'll just get thrown right out.
If it's advertising mail, that's exactly right. First class mail, you prepaid, the mailer's already prepaid forwarding costs with that. But in the case of advertising, what we call marketing mail, that does not have built-in forwarding fees. You could pay for that. You could add that to the upfront postage for it, but most marketers don't. And then they just assume that it's going to get the same level of treatment as first class mail, and it's not. The carriers are conditioned that if this is advertising mail, or you'll often see it called pre-sorted in the upper right corner. If it's advertising mail, marketing mail, and it doesn't have forwarding instructions built onto that piece, the carrier will throw it away. 4 billion a year.
That's kind of an astounding number. Yeah, there is everyone moves every 5 years. I had heard that about a month or two ago, and I was like, that's not. And then I started doing the math, and I'm like, oh, that checks out for myself personally. I don't know.
Yeah, no, exactly. And by the way, even though the Postal Service is collecting all these change of addresses, it still really only reflects about 60% of the physical moves that happen in the country on an annualized basis. So that's why companies like BCC Software, we bring in proprietary change of address data to complement that, so we can keep up with all the customers on the move. And we use things like warranty registration cards and other data sources to make sure that we got a complete 360 view of the customer.
Well, Chris, we really appreciate you being on the podcast today, the Parcelcast, should I say. Do you have any final thoughts or anything you want to leave the audience with as they come out of peak, prepare for peak, are engaged, or just generally about address validation?
Yeah, thank you, John. So first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to be on the show here today. I do want to kind of underscore again, a 3C approach, complete, correct, and current, is really the only way to ensure that timely, predictable, and ultimate delivery of a package, parcel, mail piece, whatever you're working with. And remember that it's far easier to take advantage of that technology than it's ever been before. It's as ubiquitous as possible. The upfront investment in it is minimal when you consider the downstream opportunities and return on investment that you can yield from that. So please, don't rely on a carrier to be your address quality solution. Make that upfront investment and reap the full benefits of what address quality can mean for you and your customers.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and really what I've learned from this, number one, the 3Cs, I'm not going to be able to forget those: complete, correct, and current. And really just there was a lot more that goes into an address, and I probably thought about, just like when I got in supply chain, right? The package shows up at your door, you just assume that's it, but there's a lot of stuff going into the sausage that you don't see.
Right.
Very informative, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks again.
Want to learn more about address validation? Visit us at www.bccsoftware.com or proshipinc.com. Thank you all for joining us today. If you have any questions, just a reminder, you can reach ProShip at sales@proshipinc.com, 800-353-7774, on our LinkedIn page, linkedin.com/company/ProShip-Inc. We hope you join us in December for a special preview on NRF's Retail's Big Show 2022. Again, thanks for tuning in.